Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Tiffany Meyer. In today's special episode, we have not one, not two, but three special guests. We got to speak with Michael Pillsbury, David Goldman, and Curt Mills at the National Conservatism Conference in Orlando, Florida. Michael Pillsbury, Director for Chinese Strategy at the Hudson Institute and author of The 100-Year Marathon, touches on whether or not China's recent hypersonic missile test will serve as a wake-up call for America. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
Thank you.
So recently with China's hypersonic missile test, how significant is that?
Well, I agree with General Milley. He said it's almost a Sputnik moment. Other people have said this is a game changer.
So how is it a game changer?
Well, it depends how much you know about hypersonic missiles and what they can do. Our Air Force Secretary, Frank Kendall, he explained this very well about 2 weeks ago. There's something called fractional orbital bombardment system. And it means you launch a nuclear weapon or any kind of weapon into space, into orbit, and it stays there. Then you tell it to come in and destroy something. And it can come from any direction. So missile defense or preparations don't work against it. In fact, there's almost no warning time. This is the shock value. It's a shock weapon.
So do you see this recent hypersonic missile test as kind of a wake-up call to America? Because you kind of mentioned in the 100-Year Marathon that China kind of hides its long-term strategy. So do you think this will serve as a wake-up call or no?
It should, but it won't. It's not enough. In 100-Year Marathon, what I talk about is an ancient Chinese proverb called "Don't ask the weight of the cauldrons." 不问鼎的中劲. Don't ask the weight of the cauldrons. This is a kingdom that showed its ambition to take over all of China when the leader said to an envoy, "How much do those cauldrons weigh?" In the palace, the emperor had 9 cauldrons. This went on for many dynasties. So asking this question meant I'm full of ambition to take over the world. So the Chinese very, very wisely have always played down. We have no such ambition. So this missile test, the Chinese spokesman said, no, this is not a missile. It's not a weapon. It's a spacecraft, kind of like a space shuttle. It goes around the Earth, nothing to it. And many people in America believe this kind of story. They don't want trouble with China. So it will not serve as a wake-up call, no.
So what do you think it will take for America to really wake up or just shift its stance towards China?
Well, the main thing is something like Pearl Harbor, where the debate about Japan has been going on for several years. Japan is our friend. There's some moderates in Japan. Our ambassador said he knew the Navy key person had gone to Harvard and been a Japanese naval attaché in Washington. So he was working with the moderates and this gentleman, his name is Yamamoto, Admiral Yamamoto. In secret, he was the war planner for the Pearl Harbor attack. So when the Americans on Sunday, by surprise, find their ships sunk in Pearl Harbor, 3,000 dead Navy people, then they woke up about Japan. And all this discussion about the debate about Japan is over. Now it's time for war for 3 years. So if China directly attacks an American aircraft carrier, that's about 5,000 sailors on board, then yes, that's a wake-up call. But the Chinese know this. They're not stupid. They know to avoid direct conflict and avoid a wake-up call. And today I believe some Chinese have told me they think 30% of the Americans are anti-China now. These public opinion polls that say 70%, that's really not enemy. It's really China's unfriendly or I don't trust them. But those people are still willing to invest in China, buy Chinese products. So we're nowhere near a wake-up call.
And what are some ways people can kind of learn about the real threat?
They can read 100-Year Marathon, but even 100-Year Marathon, the Chinese military translated it into Chinese, the National Defense University Press of China, and they had a ceremony for me in Beijing. They said, "This is our translation." It was perfect, every word. They had a lady colonel with a PhD in charge of translating the book, 100-Year Marathon. And their view of this book is, well, only one American has kind of understood us, but most do not. So, and I believe this is correct. I believe it's only a small minority, and even the minority only wants to say rhetorical things. China is irresponsible. They don't really do anything. There are now about 60 pieces of legislation, 60 bills against China, even asking for a report on how much are we helping China today, but many other pieces of legislation. You know the number of co-sponsors for most of these bills in the Senate? It's 100 senators make up the Senate. When I was a Senate staffer, we all knew how to get 51 or 60 senators. All of these bills, all of them, have about 5 or 6 co-sponsors. It means 95 senators, Tiffany, are not signing up to sponsor this legislation. It's very bad. Almost nothing passes that's really against the rise of China. Even the idea to subpoena Dr. Fauci or Peter Daszak. It's a Wall Street Journal editorial 2 days ago. Where's the subpoena? Nothing happened. So I believe the Chinese are still succeeding. And if they make a mistake, like Pearl Harbor was a mistake for the Japanese, they realize now it was a huge mistake. They thought the Americans would accept the Pearl Harbor attack. So only if China makes a big mistake. Look at the Uyghurs genocide claim. Trump says it, Biden says it. Genocide. Is that the kind of country we should have the Olympics with? We're going to have the Olympics with a genocide committing country. Nobody cares.
So, if it's not just waiting for China to mess up, is there anything America can do to kind of stop it?
There's many things America can do to stop it. The Republicans in the House of Representatives have a China task force. They produced a report. It had 400 recommendations. Many members of the House have also picked out part of it and proposed it as legislation. What happened, Tiffany? It didn't pass. The independent bills didn't pass. Many of them, most of them, don't even have committee hearings. Yes. So there's 400 recommendations. Now, I came down here to Orlando back in March to speak to all the Republican congressmen. I encouraged them and they agreed. You need to do this again. Don't just stop and give up. Try to see what can be passed in the future. But we don't have a national. Nancy Pelosi refuses to do anything about all of this. She told all the Democrats, do not join the task force on China. So does this mean American Congress is excited about the China threat? Absolutely not. Rhetoric, yes. Go on TV? Absolutely. Say that China's bad? Yes. But can something actually pass and become law? As the Wall Street Journal said a couple of days ago, where's the subpoena about all the money going into the Wuhan laboratory? Here's 4 million dead, Tiffany. Where's the subpoena? People didn't even know about the program with the Wuhan laboratory. In this book, I describe many, many programs to help China we still have. If you go to the U.S. Embassy website, U.S. Embassy Beijing has a website. It says this is the largest embassy in the world because we're so friendly with China. 2,300 officials work in the embassy. 50 government agencies, it says, are helping China.
So, over the years, what made you change your stance towards the Communist Party?
Because so much progress is made by China, I realize that American primacy is going to be eclipsed by China. It's just results on the ground. We're going to have a Chinese-led world order. And a lot of people are making a lot of comments now about, oh, this is a bad thing. But I think they secretly know there's nothing the U.S. is going to do to stop it. It's shocking.
Thank you.
David Goldman, columnist for Asia Times, president of MicroStrategy, and author of You Will Be Assimilated, China's Plan to Sinoform the World, he speaks on what would happen if China leads the fourth industrial revolution and what that means.
David Goldman, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for inviting me.
So in the panel today, you brought up the fourth industrial revolution. So can you kind of summarize what that is?
This is the application of artificial intelligence and big data to virtually every feature of economic life. The point I wish to emphasize is that what should concern us in the United States is not what China does wrong, but what it does right. Because if China becomes the dominant factor in the fourth industrial revolution, the United States will be diminished in power and diminished in international standing, poorer and less secure. And China has done some really remarkable things. As I said in the panel, we know when the first industrial revolution occurred. We know exactly the date. That's when a Scotsman named James Watt sold the first steam engine to a commercial customer. The fourth industrial revolution began when China used massive data sets and applied artificial intelligence algorithms to analyze the evolution of COVID-19 and suppress the disease. This is a point made by Eric Schmidt, the former CEO of Google, and a number of other analysts. I can say we broke that story in Asia Times. But it's not simply disease control. It involves manufacturing, logistics, healthcare, urban management, virtually every facet of economic life. And China is ahead of us. Sometimes centralized authority can move quicker than a democracy, and I'm very afraid that we'll be left behind, and that will be poorer and less secure as a result.
So what are some steps that maybe we can do to try and stem this threat?
Well, in the past, the United States used its defense budget as a driver for technology and science. We've really stopped doing that, but in my youth, during the Reagan administration, the United States invented the entire digital age. Everything we take for granted, from microwave ovens to plasma displays to the internet itself to GUI interface, optical networks, chip manufacturing, every one of these things was invented by the United States in a relatively short period of time, and without exception, every one of them was invented with a research grant from the Department of Defense. That's when we were focused on winning the Cold War with Russia. Now the Department of Defense is content to order 20-year-old weapons from the same defense contractors, which is good for the defense contractors, but not particularly good for the United States and for our technology policy. We've also wasted a vast amount of resources in what President Trump called forever wars. That's $6 trillion, or something like 7 years of our defense expenditures, on something that brought us no results at all, just brought us a lot of grief. So, as I said, I think what we need to do is not so much learn, but remember what we used to do.
And so why do you think that we kind of forgotten our past?
Well, I think, first of all, we became very complacent. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Russia no longer seemed like a threat, and China was an economy a tenth the size of what it is now. So we didn't think of China as a prospective competitor. Secondly, we had a utopian vision of the world where the American rules-based order would tell everybody what to do and propagate the American system. And finally, we went on this grand adventure to transform places like Iraq and Afghanistan into democracies at enormous cost, both financial and human. and we diverted resources from where they should be going. So I think complacency, if you will, narcissism, and pure stupidity led us to go from being the world's only hyperpower 30 years ago to being possibly a second-rate power now. We're not that yet, but that could happen.
And so you also have a book called You Will Be Assimilated. So what would be your biggest takeaway from that book that you hope people will get?
China wants to become the world's dominant power by emulating what the United States used to do during the Reagan years, during the Cold War years, by using the full power of the state to drive innovation through science and technology and have both guns and butter. And they want to propagate that technology across the world and become the most influential country, the dominant power. I don't think China has a plan to conquer the world in the sense that, say, Nazi Germany did or even the Soviet Union did, but certainly they want to be the most influential power and have the world, in effect, pay tribute to them.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the kind invitation.
And we also sat down with Curt Mills, contributing editor at the American Conservative. He touches on China's importance in the 2024 election and how Taiwan could play in. Let's dive in.
Welcome, Curt. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So you brought up that coming in the 2024 election, China will be a big issue. So why do you think there's been this shift towards focusing on China?
Well, I think obviously the former president, Donald Trump, shifted the paradigm considerably. And the China issue became not only the preeminent American concern, but also the preeminent Republican foreign policy concern. Obviously, Joe Biden is the president, and Joe Biden is the standard bearer of the Democratic Party. But I think, in terms of the U.S.-China policy, the ratchet is only sort of to the hawkish right. So if Biden remains the president, gets reelected, who knows? I think the U.S. will remain very hawkish. If the Republicans succeed him and come back to the White House, I think you're going to see an even, greater tone shift. I think, the major things that have shifted, obviously, is the pandemic, but also, how we talk about this issue. If you look at the opinion polling, even in the last 5 or 6 years, Americans' opinions on the regime in Beijing have shifted considerably.
So why do you think there has been that shift, like even in the public?
Well, personally, I think it's based in facts. China is the U.S.'s top geostrategic competitor, and with good reason. And since the pandemic, I can't imagine a more clear example of how enmeshment with this type of economy, slave labor, no health standards, massive duplicity coming out of Beijing. I can't imagine a greater example of why the U.S. should be less entangled with this country.
And so you've mentioned that in 2024, whoever's running will be even more hawkish than, say, Biden now or Trump won. You use that example. So what are some policies you might think of seeing coming up?
I think you're going to see, the big thing that has shifted, if you go back to the 90s and the 2000s, the Republican Party was the party of, quote, free trade. And I don't believe in free trade. I don't think it exists. I think that's an Orwellian misnomer. But that being said, it was the establishment position. I think you will see the Republicans basically codify that they are a trade nationalist, that they are a trade protectionist party, trade patriotism party, and I think you're going to see that quite dramatically. If the candidate, the standard bearer, is Mr. Trump again, I think you'll see a sort of a continuation and rebuild of what he was doing in the first term. But if it's somebody else, I think you're going to see someone put that meat on the bones there. So obviously Senator Hawley addressed this convention on last night. And I think you're going to see, he's somebody who has very much fashioned himself sort of a latter-day Theodore Roosevelt, sort of this muscular Republican Party, trade patriotism. I think you'll see people like him try to rebrand themselves as the successors to Trump in that respect.
And so right now it seems the biggest question is the Taiwan issue, right? It's like not if, a lot of people are saying it's not if, but when Beijing is going to attack. And America has been hiding kind of behind this strategic ambiguity. So do you see that as America having to take a more not ambiguous stance, or what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think the U.S. is moving towards a less ambiguous stance. I understand the security reasons to remain ambiguous, but I think, frankly, that's not the real reason that's happening, or at least it's the secondary reason. The real reason is sort of a business cowardice. Take, for instance, the tape by the fighter John Cena, where he had to apologize to Beijing. It's super embarrassing. You can't imagine, any other country where that would have been at all acceptable. Russia, Iran would have been highly controversial. China is just taken as a given. I think you're going to see a shift on that. I think you're going to see. It's so much talk about Trump, the Republicans, but even President Biden, a Democrat, the leader of the Democratic Party, has been out in front of even his sort of underlings and subordinates and saying, it's perhaps time we should make a greater commitment to Taiwan. And so if Biden is doing that, just imagine where any imaginable Republican successor would go.
And so some have brought up that Biden is running on the previous Trump policy towards China. And so even say China is saying that's not going to last long term. So how do you see that going forward? Is it going to change?
I think you're going to see a potential precipitous move towards decoupling. These economies will be much less enmeshed. I think you're going to see the world deglobalize. This is not a policy preference. I think this is a fact. The world is deglobalizing. It's moving into sectors. It's moving into regions of influence. And I think you're going to see one region led by the free and democratic West, relatively free anyways, versus the horrifying sort of state capitalist communist party regime run by China. I think there's all types of gray area countries, Russia, places like parts of Europe. But in general, I think you're going to see a real sort of put up or shut up moment for allies and adversaries of the United States. Are you with Washington or are you with Beijing? And I think, at the end of the day, for all of the faults of the U.S., I think plenty of places are going to choose America over China, and rightfully so. It's a better way of life.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And for those just tuning in, that was today's special episode with guests Michael Pillsbury, David Goldman, and Curt Mills. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.